Hello. Hi, everyone. Just for folks who joined us a bit later, just wanted to let you know that we have coffee, tea, and water in the room next door, and we will get started at 10. Thank you. Hello, hello. Testing, testing. Hello, hello. Hi. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello. Good morning. What are they doing? Hello, hello. Hello, yep. Good morning. Yep, awesome. All right. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to ASPO 2024 Fireside Chat. My name is Chanel, Partnerships and Development Officer with the team here at ASPO. And let's jump right in. So, I just wanted to do a quick access check in terms of audio and visual. Can everyone hear us clearly, or can you hear me clearly at least? Yeah, thumbs up, folks at the back. Awesome. And are you able to see the slide? Thumbs up? Yeah. Great. So please let us know if there's anything that we can do to make your participation with us today as comfortable as possible. We do have some QR codes on the tables that I will tell you a little bit more shortly in that regard. But just to give you an overview of the agenda, so we are going to be starting off with the land and ancestral acknowledgements, followed by opening remarks and introductions to the ASPO team. Then we will have our panel, Q&A, a brief lunch, and ASPO updates in the afternoon, followed by conversation circles, closing remarks, and from 1:30 to 2:30, we will have a optional networking session should folks choose to stick around for that portion. So housekeeping, we are streaming online right now. We do have some attendees who have already joined, so feel free to take advantage of the commenting section and feel free to put your questions in there throughout the day, and we'll be happy to support. My colleague Anda is gonna be sharing some of those comments and questions with us. Washrooms are available to the right of the registration desk. If you remember where you came in and you got your name tags, they are down that hall. They have male and female washrooms down that hall. However, there is a gender neutral washroom on the first floor, so that is to the right of the receptionist area, further down the hall. So if you're familiar with Heart House, it's in the vicinity of the Great Hall. So just wanted to let you know that. In terms of morning refreshments, we do have coffee, tea, and water available in the room right across from here, so feel free to help yourself throughout the morning. And you'll notice at your tables that we do have some merchandise available. We have a few pens and sticky notes. Feel free to help yourselves. We do have some instruction sheets in the middle, but that's not for now. It's for later on this afternoon. And in terms of the virtual parking lot, so you'll notice some QR codes that you can use throughout the day to post any questions or any general comments that you'd like for us to follow up on after the event today. So at this time, I would like to invite Dave Kim, Warden of Heart House, to do the land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Chanel. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Kim, he, him pronouns, Warden at Heart House. Thanks for being here. So nice to be here. Helen and I met when she was at the Council of Educators Toronto. I was a doctoral student, so I just want to acknowledge that. It's really nice to be part of this morning. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As a first-generation university graduate and son of an immigrant family that settled on Treaty 13 territory in Toronto, I'm so grateful to see the work emerging from the Access Strategy in Partnerships Office and other partners that are here today. I look forward to engaging in conversation that is focused on supporting communities that have typically been underrepresented in post-secondary spaces. So thank you.
And next, I will deliver our ancestral acknowledgement. So we wish to acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those who were brought to these lands or those lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We paid tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent, and this was taken from the City of Toronto. So it is important to be mindful that these acknowledgements are not intended to be a recital, but rather a moment of reflection and commitment to action. As a settler on this land, I have made a commitment to learning about colonialism and its impact on Indigenous peoples, as well as deepening my understandings of Indigenous histories, pedagogies, and cultures. I do so to increase my awareness of systemic issues that disproportionately impact Indigenous communities and to better inform the work of our office in bolstering the access and outreach efforts of the Tri-Campus Access community. It is also a personal journey for me to uncover truths about my ancestors, many of whom were displaced here, to develop a better sense of who I am, where I come from, and the way forward. I encourage you to take a moment today to reflect on your relationship to this land and commitment to action as we discuss the ways in which we support Indigenous, Black, racialized, and other socioeconomically disadvantaged students in our access and academic programs. Thank you. So at this time, I would like to invite Vice Provost student Sandy Welch to deliver the opening remarks.
Thank you, Chanel, and I don't know who that person is with short hair. After 20 years, I decided it was time. The youngest kid left the house. I had to do something to shake it up. But seriously, good morning, everyone, and I'm honored to have been invited to today's event, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you all in my capacity as U of T's Vice Provost students to the not yet burning Fireside Chat. Maybe, Dave, we can do something about that the next time. But to this wonderful Fireside Chat on access and strategic student recruitment practices that's organized by the Access Strategy and Partnerships Office that I am very proud and honored to have as part of my Vice Provostio portfolio. In reflecting on access programs and how to remove barriers to access to higher education, I believe one of the most important things that we can do at our institution is to ensure that there's a supportive environment in which all of you who are on the ground, who are doing the work, can come together to foster and encourage diverse and creative ideas so we can understand, we can learn the lessons that we need to learn, and we can do better at the work of recruiting, of admitting, and of transitioning our students who are bringing in through these amazing access programs. Today's Fireside Chat is the ideal space for you to gather, share your thoughts and experiences, and explore new approaches to strengthen the access programs you currently work with to better support our current and future students. And additionally, many of our access programs work closely with colleagues in our admissions, the admissions part of the university, whether it's the university recruitment office or with your admissions and recruitment folks in your academic divisions. And this is so important to ensure that there's as seamless a transition as possible, and it's why the panel today is so timely as we are thinking across the institution, how can we do more, how can we do better, and how can we work together in ways that really allow us to meet the needs of our students. We're so fortunate to have such a dedicated and passionate group of people who are working in this area, and I want to thank all of you who are here today to share your knowledge, your time, and your expertise. And I also want to thank and commend the Access Strategy and Partnership Office, or ASPO, acronym you're going to hear a lot today, the team for coordinating such a thoughtful agenda. Thanks, Chanel, for getting us started in such a wonderful, warm, and welcoming way. And so thank you to the staff of ASPO for organizing this. Let's give them a round of applause. And before I hand this over to Helen to get the rest of the day going, I thought I would just say a few words about Helen and her team. It was very easy to onboard Helen when she was hired in 2022 because it turned out she knew everybody at U of T. Like, Dave mentioned how they, knew each other at this other part of life. I had colleagues, once the announcement went out, colleagues across the institution saying, I know Helen from here, from here, from here. So I feel like while I know Helen still feels that she's new to U of T, it seems to me that she's long been a part of U of T, and it's why she's such a perfect hire and a perfect person in the position to be leading the office. I think, as many of you know, she has a long-standing background in public policy and programming, and as well as in establishing partnerships and fostering access to education in higher education before she joined U of T in 2022. Helen's team also oversees the Access Programs University Fund. I refer to that one as APOOF. Other people say it differently, but I kind of like the APOOF. I have to have some fun in my portfolio. But APOOF launched in 2019 and has since supported 52 various access, let me say that slower, 52 various access initiatives across U of T, which is an amazing amount of access work that we have been doing at this university since 2019, with over $4 million in funding dispersed across our 3 campuses to a wide and diverse range of academic divisions and parts of the institution. Over 40 of the APOOF funded programs since 2019 are particularly focused on Indigenous, Black, and mature learners. And I thought I would just take a moment to highlight some of that diverse programming and that diverse reach of the types of programs that we've recently funded through APOOF. First, there is MedLinks, which is a program run by U of T's Temerity Faculty of Medicine, and it specifically supports high school students from underrepresented communities who are interested in exploring current health care. The next one, which I think sounds really cool, is the Future Sound 6. It's a program for female identifying or gender nonconforming youth, ranging in age from 14 to 20 years old, that the Faculty of Music hosts at their electronic music studio to learn about music and audio production. And it really shows that from the Faculty of Music to our large arts and science divisions to our graduate and professional programs, there is a lot of interest in access work and in raising our sites in terms of having underrepresented students in our programs. UTM's Center for Student Engagement recently received funding to support Indigenous Access Day for local schools, hosting Indigenous identifying students from Peel District School Board to tour the campuses and participate in activities to become familiar with the supports and services available to them at UTM and across other institutions. And I know a big part of that as well is to help these students see themselves as part of post-secondary, as part of U of T. And as well, UTSC's Support Engage Experience, or C program, is an access program offered in collaboration with the Toronto District School Board. Participants who are Black and Indigenous identifying students engage in programming while they are in grades 11 and 12. And so thank you to all of you who are doing the work every day, who are supporting our prospective students in your access programs, who are supporting our students who are here. I'm so very grateful for your work. And now I'm happy to invite Helen up to the podium so she can tell you more about her amazing team and the work they are doing, and to lead today's panel chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I know Sandy has to run. Thank you for that introduction. You shouldn't even get to hear me say thank you to her. Especially for the continued support of the Access Strategy and Partnerships Office and APOOF initiatives across campus. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you here today. We really are here to connect with each other today, and we couldn't do this work without all of you in the room. So before we begin, Anda's also gone before I was able to introduce her. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce my colleagues. So you've already met Chanel, who's Partnerships and Development Officer. Where's Nancy? Nancy might still be up at registration, but if you've ever received an Access Programs University Fund grant, you will know Nancy. You will have gotten her emails about reporting or budgeting, etc. And then Anda, who's just left. She's Programs and Partner Pathways Officer. So ASPO, as you know, supports both internal and external partners who help students access and thrive in post-secondary education. Over the past 20 years in access work, I've observed that while there are many innovative access programs and well-coordinated admissions processes, they sometimes operate in separate worlds and often lack connection. One of my goals since joining U of T has been to bridge this gap by working with and learning from, more importantly, colleagues in University Admissions and Outreach and the University Registrar's Office, URO. So today we're bringing together the Access Program community with colleagues from recruitment and admissions to explore how these areas, though closely related in intention, to engage and support prospective students, can continue to learn from and leverage important insights to advance tri-campus access goals. So up there, I'm just going to share a few of our key activities at ASPO. So as Sandy mentioned, we are here to build, sustain, and increase the capacity of all of our work in access across the tri-campus. And fun fact, trivia, we have close to 135 access and outreach programs across U of T, which is incredible. In 2015, when I was at the Council of Educators of Toronto, we had U of T representation at that table, and there were 30 programs at that time. So what an increase in less than 10 years. And close to 40% of those programs have been supported by APOO funding since 2019. So we're here to support the development of some key partnerships to enhance access goals. And we're also here to make sure that access and access principles are infused in our university policies and programs as much as possible. So just a little bit more about today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about who's in the room. So we know that we have the big bucket of access program community and then the recruitment and admissions colleagues, but I thought we would disaggregate that a little bit more so you know who's here. And of course, what is our goal for our time together today? It's to foster collaboration and connection, and to hear some feedback and insight that will continue to inform our work in respective areas. Anda, maybe you can wave. So that's Anda Petra. I just introduced you. Okay. Okay, so who's in the room? So St. George has, home court advantage here today. We're at 79% of folks here are from St. George. 8% from Mississauga. Yay, UTM. Thank you for coming. Most of them were very smart and used public transportation, I learned, so didn't have to deal with traffic. And Scarborough, UTSC, we've got about 13% of you here from UTSC. And in terms of affiliation, so I'm going to ask you to give us some energy when I call out your divisions. Just clap if this is your division. So unsurprisingly, we have the most representation from Faculty of Arts and Science. Yes, welcome. And then we have Faculty of Law here. Did they come? Yes, they're here in the back. We've got TYP. Yeah, okay. They beat the algorithm. They're louder. They're not more than FAS, but they're louder for sure. Okay. Oisey. Yeah! Oh my gosh. Oisey. I've got to co-sign that. I used to go to Oisey. Student life. Woohoo! Look at that humility from student life. Student life. Woo! Phase, so engineering. Oh, Cassandra. Okay, let's all clap for Cassandra from Phase. Faculty of Medicine. We've got about 4 people here. There we go. Quiet overachievers in the back there. DLSPH, Dalalana School of Public Health. No? And finally, registrarial or non-faculty or administrative staff. That's us too. Okay, I don't know. Sorry, technical language there. So yes, it says here that others is primarily comprised of administrative functions, and 45% of the recruitment and admissions folks in the room today do support access programs, so welcome. And 60% of access folks in the room today indicate that they work with recruitment and admissions, so we do have some overlap here. In terms of the student demographics we support in the room, we have about 5% that support elementary age students. We've got high school at 29%, undergraduate students at 32%, not surprising. Graduate schools, so second entry programs, 12%, and mature learners, 22%. So that's the makeup in terms of the demographics we're supporting in the room. And in terms of the scope of our work, as mentioned, access programs almost 2/3, so about 56%. Recruitment and admissions, 26%, so almost 1/3, and then other is about 18%. And again, that's a lot of our administrative functions that support access programs as well. Okay, so just quickly around ASPO, there are 5 key priorities that were consolidated for our office. But in the past couple of years, we focused on 2 of those, which were presented at Access Connections Day on May 2nd, 2023, for feedback and ranking. And those were to identify structural barriers for the first one. So these barriers are to access pathways with both internal partners and external partners. And secondly, to strengthen U of T's capacity to support access, engagement, and outreach efforts for students. So Anda and Chanel will provide updates after lunch on the progress we're making in these areas, including gleaning insights from surveys about some of the barriers faced by tri-campus access programs, developing a comprehensive database of programs to strengthen our information architecture about the landscape of access programs at U of T, and understanding our access partnerships and the capacity required from all of you to develop and sustain them. So we seek to leverage the data you share with us via APOOF reports, surveys, conversations, and events such as these to inform our work going forward. So speaking of data, one of the most overarching barriers in developing and designing interventions for divisions has been the access to data to understand the demographic profile of registered U of T students. So the Student Equity Census addresses the data gap that many of us have been facing. Thanks to my colleagues Jesse Metcalf and Roger Pizarro-Milian, who I believe is online watching, hi Roger, from the Office of the Vice Provost Students, for sharing insights on the census, which is a demographic tool collecting data from all registered U of T students. It includes questions on gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, indigeneity, race, religion and spiritual affiliation, and parental education. It's connected to Acorn, which allows matching with other data such as age and campus, and it's also open year-round, which allows students to update responses anytime. And so this data is shared via an online public dashboard, which is now complete, and this is filtered by campus, study level, and domestic international student status, which will be updated annually. And it also has an internal dashboard, which is in development, and it has more detailed filters, which will also be updated annually. And data requests for these, which I know so many people are chomping at the bit, many meetings I've had have been naming this need to request the data. That happens via a common review process. So you can get in touch with Roger if you have any questions about that process. So with this data, it's really an exciting time to be doing this work. We're in a stronger position to collaborate across access programs, admissions teams, and academic divisions to create smart, customized, and responsive interventions that move us closer to our tri-campus access goals. A few of the champions who deeply understand the connections between access programming and admissions are on our panel this morning. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce them. So as I call your name, if you can come up to the front. June, who I saw earlier. June Viglatsis. Yay, June. So June is coordinator of academic supports at First Nations House, Indigenous Student Services, since September 2022. Her role has been to support and advocate for Indigenous students with financial resources and navigating university and community supports. Prior to joining the team at First Nations House, June worked in an administrative and frontline capacity with Toronto Police Services, Anishinaabe Health Toronto, and Native Child and Family Services. June is a University of Toronto alumna and was born and raised in Toronto. She has Greek ancestry on her father's side and mixed German and Mohawk ancestry on her mother's side. Thank you so much for being here, June. Another round of applause for June. Next up is Kiyomi Hastings Duncan. Yay, Kiyomi. So Kiyomi has worked at the University of Toronto in the field of admissions and student recruitment. Thank you. Since 2000, and believes it is imperative for all learners from marginalized and racialized groups to see themselves reflected in post-secondary education. As a settler to this land, immigrating from Guyana, growing up in Scarborough, and attending high school in the Malvern neighborhood. Any Malvern folks in the room? I know there isn't, because they would be making noise. Oh, okay, there are a couple, okay. All right. Kiyomi brings her lived experiences into the work she does and uses this as a catalyst to continue to advocate for change within our educational system. As Director of Admissions and Student Recruitment, Kiyomi is responsible for ensuring all prospective students see U of T Scarborough as a community in which they belong and a community in which they have the agency to define one's own idea of success. In a role which blends public relations, marketing and communications with application assessments, career counseling, and academic advising. What do you not do, Kiyomi? Oh my gosh. Kiyomi leads a team of professionals to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into all aspects of the student recruitment and admissions process. Kiyomi's also been instrumental in supporting the launch of 2 access and outreach programs, the Transitional Year Program, TYP at UTSC, and CU of T Scarborough, which Sandy mentioned earlier. Kiyomi's efforts in enacting anti-oppressive practices extend beyond her involvement with the Office of the Registrar, for she served in an advisory capacity on several university committees and is a member of the leadership team for UTSC's Connections and Conversations Affinity Group for Racialized Staff. Yay, Kiyomi. Thank you so much for being here. Finally, I see him peering outside the door. He's waiting in the wings. Dr. Ryan Hargraves. Welcome in, Ryan. And congratulations, I understand you just completed your PhD. Another round of applause, Dr. Hargraves. Dr. Ryan Hargraves is the Executive Director of University Admissions and Outreach at the University of Toronto. Before joining U of T, he served as Executive Director of Admissions and Orientation at the University of Vermont and as Senior Associate Dean of Admissions at the University of Virginia, where he chaired the Athletic Advisory Council. At UVA, he also helped launch the Undergraduate Admission Outreach Office, focusing on initiatives to support students from underrepresented backgrounds and navigating the admissions process. Ryan has also been a faculty member for the Emerging Leaders Program, sponsored by the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, and for 3 years served as a delegate to the College Board's Access and Diversity Collaborative. Does anyone know the College Board? It's quite a large resource in the US. Of course, Dr. McCready, you know that. An expert in international student enrollment, he currently oversees the admission, recruitment, and outreach efforts to students from nearly 200 countries and regions. Additionally, he's a member of the Strategic Higher Education Advisor Council for Cambridge University Press and Assessment, and he holds a bachelor's degree in, get this, biological chemistry, and a master's in social foundations of education from the University of Virginia. He earned his doctorate in educational leadership and policy from Ontario Institute for Studies in Education here at U of T, and his research focuses on the role of admissions committees at top North American universities. Welcome, Dr. Hargraves. Thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to join them for our fireside chat. We opted not to have the fire on because we were told it gets very, very warm. And so we wanted you all to stay. Yeah. Oh, you're sitting there. Okay. All right. I was instructed. All right. Okay. All right, you all comfortable? Do you want to pour your water first?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yes. You can keep that one. I'll use my water. So, I have the pleasure of asking you the questions today, and some of them are directed to specific individuals, but it is a conversation, so please, can everyone hear me? No? Okay. Let me get the Hello? Okay, I think I just need to speak a bit closer. All right, so I have the pleasure of asking questions for the panel today. The first question is really an introductory one, and it's directed to all of you. So could you please tell us a little bit more about your role here at U of T and how you define access within the context of your work? June, I'll start with you.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. I apologize. I'm not used to speaking into microphones. So as Helen said in my intro, I'm the coordinator of academic supports at First Nations House. I would say the primary focus of my role has been financial aid and resources for our students. But as the time has gone for the last 2 years, I've seen my role more as like a catch-all. I do get a lot of community members contacting me directly on how to apply to U of T, what do I need to do to get into U of T. So in terms of access, a lot of our community members will come to us first before they go to any other program because they're looking for a pathway and they're just looking for the supports that exist at the institution. So, and then when they get into the institution, they come to us, they have a really hard time navigating all the different systems, all the different websites, all the different supports. So my role has been to try to match them up, whether it's in their faculty, with student life, on their campus. So I may have already reached out to some of you in this room. I surprised myself when I was chatting with a whole bunch of people here today. So my whole role has been to try to make connections and then help those students with my connections. So it makes them feel more at home.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. So as Helen said, my name is Kiyomi, and I'm the Director of Admissions and Student Recruitment at UTSC. And in my role, I'm responsible for getting people into the university, trying to reach out to as many prospective students as possible, offer equitable admissions process so that we can have them come in and start their undergraduate degree studies. So we engage in a lot of outreach work like school visits and, post-secondary fairs. We'll organize tons of on-campus events and have tour programs, and we work really closely with our marketing and communications team to engage in various campaigns, both in traditional and in new media formats. And these all work for very traditional, quote unquote, audiences. But we know they don't work for a lot of audiences as well. And so my work in Access in particular is looking at how can we work in different ways to encourage historically underrepresented students to see themselves at university. And that means sometimes turning recruitment and admissions upside down and doing things a little bit differently. And so it's a challenge, but it's also very exciting because you do get to try and do different things.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Hargraves, and I oversee, as Helen mentioned, the University Admissions and Outreach portfolio. And so I only have 3 minutes, right? Yeah. Okay, because I have about an hour's worth of, okay, 2.5. Yeah, so generally speaking, my work involves work with partners like Kiyomi and June and First Nations House. And our paradigm is student enrollment. So we're thinking about the prospective student from cradle, which is the first time they become a prospect, or point at which they become a prospect, to launch. So it's kind of thinking about their journey through graduation. When I started this work, we were intent with respect to the specific functions related to student recruitment and student admissions, but that is expanded to outreach. So we did a bit of a rebrand because ultimately we want to make sure that where there is student underrepresentation, I think you're going to cover that a little bit later, we help students, as Kiyomi mentioned, we help them see themselves at places like University of Toronto earlier in the process. And so we've been working with our administrative partners in OVPS, we've been working with Helen, we've been working with the faculty to try to find students for whom the University of Toronto would be a good match. But we also know in the literature there's this phenomenon called undermatching. And a lot of students from underrepresented populations, even if they're well qualified, they don't apply because of this lack of sense of belonging piece. And that's something that we've been working on. Many of you have heard me talk about the Enrichment Academy program that we have. We start working with students in grade 8 because, you know, and I'll sum my comments up, don't worry, I'm gonna be timely in this. But I think that, you know, we could all sort of, we could agree that based on the rankings, the University of Toronto is a great university, Times Higher Ed, QS, employability, et cetera. But I think we have a unique opportunity through our work to be a good university. And so we've been thinking about how to contribute to our community and make connections to be more accessible to students through enrollment paradigms.
Thank you so much. So does your team, this is directed to Ryan and Kiyomi, does your team currently work closely with Access partners across the 3 campuses? And if so, how do they work together? But if not, in what ways do you anticipate working with Access partners?
So we do get a chance to work with many colleagues across the university. That's the exciting part. Specifically with the transitional year program at UTSC, we launched the on-campus version of that program about 2 years ago. So it meant working really closely with our colleagues downtown at St. George, who's had the TYP program for over 60 years, and learning from the labor and the work that they've done to create that program. It's also meant for us working with the C U of T Scarborough program, also working with colleagues downtown at St. George, at Woodsworth, as well as with the Mississauga campus, who also have versions of the C U of T program. And like U of T, we're all different in our versions that we offer. So that's also been an interesting experience, because as much as we want to have consistency and to make things streamlined and real easy. Let's face it, if something is the same, it's kind of easy to understand and grasp at. The fact is, our audiences, who our stakeholders are, who are the values or the approaches of our campuses are all very different. So we all often will have to take similar versions of the programs and adjust it. And that makes the working relationship kind of interesting, because you're learning from your partners across the 3 campuses of, oh, you do things differently. Ah, we don't do it like that. We do it like this because of X, Y, Z. And it just creates a really rich environment in which you can share ideas. And then, of course, we get a chance to work with the Office of Student Recruitment and University Admissions and Outreach on various access and outreach programs during the year. So things like the Enrichment Academy, you know, Future Black Students event, Future Indigenous Students event, we'll be able to partner with our colleagues there.
Yeah, so along the lines of what Kiyomi mentioned, you know, I remember, so I was hired in March of 2021, and then a few months later, I went to the Vice Provost Strategic Enrollment Management, Dwayne Benjamin, who's an econ professor, and I said, hey, had this idea for a program, and you know, my colleague Ken and my colleague Lydia, they're on board with this, and how can we launch, so what became the Enrichment Academy. And so we actually had a meeting with Provost Cheryl Regier, and the first thing she said was, well, you need to talk to Sandy first. And then Sandy said, you need to talk to Helen, right? And the point of that is that there are access programs, there are access stakeholders, and there are access advocates who are named, right? Everybody knows that Dr. Lance McCready is a access stakeholder, right? Everybody knows that Helen Tewald is an access stakeholder, but there are lots of people in departments who are doing things that, you know, they're operating programs or have aspirations to operate programs that aren't formalized. They're basically on the side of their desk. And so a lot of what we've been trying to do is find those partners, see how our work intersects, and then also to find those people who are working behind the scenes who might help us from a data perspective, you know, and I'm actually gonna call out my thesis advisor, Dr. Childs. I know she didn't want me to call her out, but somebody who's doing work considering, you know, access as it relates to admissions through her scholarship. So we're coordinating across the tri-campus community to try to do our work most effectively.
Thank you so much. Next question is also for Ryan and Kiyomi. And you're on the hook now because you work in in strategic enrollment management. So the terms underrepresented or non-traditional students are often used to describe cohorts of prospective or current students. Sorry, is that better? I'll repeat that. The terms underrepresented or non-traditional students are often used to describe cohorts of prospective or current students. Can you share insights about these terms and how they apply to the work you do in your respective areas?
You want me to go first? Okay, I'll go first.
And maybe we'll keep the mic closer so folks at the back can hear us.
All right, just wave your hands like this if you stop hearing me clearly. So this term underrepresented is a bit fleeting, and one of the things that I had to reconcile, so as Helen mentioned, I spent the first 20 or so years of my career in enrollment management in the United States. And there's a little bit of a different data paradigm. Data, and for better or for worse, and you all know what's happening with respect to the journey regarding affirmative action and the attacks on DEIA in the US as we speak. That said, one of the things that I did have the advantage of is really rich data sets. So if I wanted to find the number of African American left-handed tuba players in Nassau County, I could find it, right? And so when I got here, I was like, where's all my demographic data? And they're like, right? And so I then, thought that, one, we need to not only figure out, who's applying and who's enrolling, but also who we're not reaching. And so this term underrepresentation, just in context, really represents the demographic population of an institution and then the contextual population as described. And it's a little bit murky because, you have these geographies that sort of define the University of Toronto ecosystem. And, we're Canadian, we're Torontonian, we're Ontarian, we're global, right? And then you think about the hundreds and hundreds of programs, right, that we have here across our tri-campus community. And it's a little fleeting because you also have to consider the intersection of identity as well. So it's not just about racial or ethnocultural identity or, gender identity or, religious affiliation or lack thereof. It is all those things. And so, I think that it's really been helpful for us. And I know, Sandy has had a tremendous leadership role in ensuring that we have some data so we can understand who's here. But really, it's about the contextual environment that the university is located in. So I consider the University of Toronto as a global institution. Our context is, yes, it's local, but it's also global as well.
Thanks for that, Ryan. And I'm going to pick up on one of the things Ryan said, which was the intersectionality of identity, because whenever I see the terms underrepresented or non-traditional student, I think of, are we putting people into boxes? Are we summarizing the entirety of their human experience into one very specific kind of thing? And so when we're looking at our access programming or being involved in any kind of initiatives, it's really questioning our approaches and thinking very intentionally about who are we building this for, who are we creating the structure, the process, the programs for, and are we falling into the trap of just doing something one way for one type of person, one type of individual? And it's a challenge for us because it means that we do have to take in the multidimensional aspects of identity when we're creating programming for our students. I'll give you an example. For CU of T Scarborough, our students will engage in co-curricular learning and various extracurricular activities while they're at the Scarborough campus. And, they're high school students, 16 years old, 17 years old. And so you want to create programming that's going to reach to all the different interests and different things that they might want to pursue. So sure, we could go in and do the typical, here's how you apply to U of T, here's, how our programs work, here's our your transition to university will be, and we do those kinds of information sessions, but we know that may not always resonate with students. So how can we create sessions that will fit with their interests in media, in the arts, in sports? What about sessions where they're connecting with current students, people who may have similar experiences to them? The other thing that it makes me think of when I hear the terms underrepresented or non-traditional is, are we approaching our work from a deficit mindset, right? How are we viewing our community? Are we viewing them as bringing excellence, knowledge, importance, power? Or do we view them as lacking? And sometimes what I see in our very traditional sort of post-secondary environment is we do have a deficit mentality. Think about how many scholarships and bursary programs that we have. They're for Black or Indigenous students, and they're identifying students with financial need. So automatically we're saying if you're a Black or Indigenous student, you must have financial need. And I'm not denying that that's the reality for many people in our community. But are there scholarships and awards that are identifying, here's an award for a Black or Indigenous student who's demonstrating academic excellence, who's demonstrating community involvement, who's demonstrating leadership? We see those in other kinds of awards, but you don't necessarily see that a lot when we look at equity-based kind of funding. So again, it's just challenging how we are perceiving and how we're working, and within our various roles, where do we have the capacity and the agency to start to shift some of these perspectives and practices.
Thank you so much, Kiyomi and Ryan. I think a lot of people in the room working on access programs would appreciate that nuance and that multidimensionality that you're bringing to the identities of students that most of our programs are focusing on. June, the next question is for you. Can you speak to us a little bit more about the unique contexts or challenges that Indigenous students encounter as they transition into their programs at U of T? I know you mentioned some of those in your introduction, the first question, but if you could just expound on them a little bit for the rest of us. Can you hear us still at the back? Okay.
I would say for the students that I've met over the last couple years, and even the students that I've met who are alum, the theme that always comes up is seeing themselves here in the institution, not seeing themselves in their program or in their faculty. Another issue that they have when they're transitioning into program is they don't know how to access supports specifically as a Indigenous student, and sometimes their education can be very extractive, where because they're the only Indigenous student in the classroom, they're asked to be almost like an expert or to talk about their lived experience, where that person is just there to also get an education. They paid for it just like anybody else, so that can be very challenging for our students, especially being seen as a certain kind of Indigenous person in terms of identity. There's a whole range of people, whether you're First Nation status or non-status, Métis, Inuit, like within all of those, there's a different type of, like there's varying degrees. So that is what I've been seeing a lot. And then just obviously what we just talked about, financial barriers. Everybody assumes that their education is paid for. So again, it feeds into stereotypes and racism. So and then just the challenge of not being able to access any of those services. And I don't really know what happens at the admission part because I'm not part of that team, but a lot of students will come to us and say, we didn't know that you were here, and I'm in my third or fourth year. So that to me is mind-boggling because First Nations House has been around for over 30 years. It predates a lot of other programming at U of T. So those are like very unique challenges to our space. So, yeah.
Thank you, June. Just a show of hands. Who knew about or has worked with First Nations House? Okay. All right. I think we're preaching maybe mostly to the converted here, but please share it with the other people.
To the choir.
So preaching to the choir. Yes. Thank you. And thank you also for just underscoring that burden of representation that students feel. In the US, I think it's called minority tax. You can correct me, Ryan. But I think it's a real one, and I've heard that from students frequently. So thank you for underscoring that. So many of our colleagues in the room have experience designing and developing access programs and pathways that focus on outreach and support for prospective Indigenous students. June, what would you say are some of the factors to consider as we design and build access programs or pathways for Indigenous students?
I would say to have meaningful partnerships with the community that's already here for the supports that are in place. I think it would be great for First Nation Souths to be part of all access programs in some way, whether it's consulting or doing direct programming with them. We have a lot of different resources and we have a great team. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten, or because the students don't know about it, they're not accessing it. I think it would be really, for example, to partner with mentorship programs for first-year students and the access programs, and do programming before they step into the classroom, and just get them comfortable accessing all of the different supports, because just because they're a Indigenous student, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to come and access our space, because they may think that they aren't able to go there or it's not for them. So I would just say meaningful partnerships, and I've had meetings and visits with many people from access programs who have come to First Nation South to see who we are, to see our students, to meet our staff, and show them what we can do together, instead of just sending a student somewhere and then hoping that they end up there, because I find most of the times they won't end up there. You have to bring them, like it has to be warm, right? So, and they have to see themselves in the space.
Thank you, June. So, Kiyomi, next question's for you. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges or tensions between the goals of access programs and our admissions and recruitment policies and practices? I know a lot of us in the room experience that rub. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I think the one word that comes to mind is tension. There's always the tension that exists between what you need to do in admissions and student recruitment versus what you aspire to do within access programming. Some of the tensions are structural. Our admissions and student recruitment cycle, when we open up applications, when we offer admissions, when we're in peak yield season, which is when students have their offers and we're trying to convince them to accept their offers to U of T. It means that a lot of your resources are totally focused on that admissions and recruitment process. And so you may not necessarily always have time, people, resources available to now do the access programming when a community group reaches out to you in April and says, hey, we want to bring, 30 newcomer youth to your campus to spend a day on campus. In April, you're thinking, oh my gosh, the deadline date for our students to accept the offer is coming up soon, and I need to meet my enrollment target of bringing in 4,000 students. So at the end of the day, the quantity sometimes always wins out, right? A lot of our access programming, it's quite small. You're looking at 20 students for CU of T Scarborough. For TYP in the last 2 years, we've had roughly around anywhere from 10 to 15 students. So when I'm thinking, especially as a director, and where I'm going to, allocate staff time and resources to, I'm going to go to the 4,000 students that I need to bring into my campus, because that has direct budget implications. And that's the other tension that is existing right now. Our budget implications that a lot of our post-secondary institutions are facing, again, means that we're heavily focused on ensuring that we're bringing in the appropriate number of international students and domestic students into the university. So whenever we're doing work with access and outreach, it's where can we leverage existing programming? Where can we leverage our existing partnerships to bring these two pieces together, so you don't always have to create something brand new or add on an extra piece, but supplement something that you're already doing. So we're pretty lucky at the Scarborough campus, because we've got good relationships with our community partnerships and engagement office, with our Office of Student Experience and Wellbeing, and they do a lot of access programming, similarly with our relationships with OSR and UAO downtown here. So we can leverage those relationships, and we can say, for example, to our Community Partnerships and Engagement Office, we've got a newcomer organization, they're bringing 30 students. Can you help us with the planning of this? If you can help us, set up an info session or get a community member to come and do a workshop for them, we'll take care of the campus tours and provide the funding for lunch, right? So there's a shared cost, a shared responsibility, and that's what I encourage those of you feeling the tension is really reach out and learn from your colleagues, see what it is they're doing to see how you can now work together in a more collaborative and cohesive way.
Thank you so much, Kiyomi. I love the term leverage. I think that's exactly why we're having this gathering today, is so we can start thinking about how to do that more and better. Ryan, the next question is for you. So you've been, and I'm lucky to have sort of an inside scoop on this, having been to your SEM retreats and some other workshops. You've been advancing the concept of holistic admissions. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this means?
Yeah, good question, Helen. So how many of you are familiar with the term holistic admissions? Okay. So holistic admissions, and I'll tell you a little quick story and then I'll get into the meat of my answer. But I was at a conference about 6 or 7 years ago leading a workshop, and I asked the attendees, what is holistic admissions? And a young admissions counselor very confidently raised his hand and he said, it's when you read the whole application. And I said, okay, that's a start. Absolutely. The truth is, holistic admissions is really a process by which applicants are evaluated in their entire context, right? And it is, I'm going to say two things about it. Number one, it's typically employed by programs that are either selective or highly selective or extremely selective. They have well more applicants than they have seats available. And so they're often getting into some of the more subjective nature or subjective aspects of the application. And number two, it's an expensive enterprise, right? It requires a lot of resources. I will say it's not always necessary, but it's this idea that we consider the applicant in the context of not only their academic performance, not only in the context of their other characteristics and attributes, but also the context for their being. So when I was, and Helen mentioned this, when I worked with the College Board's Access and Diversity Committee, they actually came out with a tool called the Environmental Context Dashboard. And we had information, and this would provide universities information about the student's curricular profile. So, you could look at a student who has taken, let's say, I'll use, all these advanced placement courses. A student who's taken 4 AP courses at a school where 5 are offered, versus they've taken 2 at a school where 30 are offered. It will give us information about that student's neighborhood context. So I used to do a lot of work in DC public schools, and many of the students lived in areas that had extreme poverty, right? And so we had to consider the student socioeconomic context. Generally speaking, holistic admissions means that we look at all parts of the application, and often when holistic admissions is practiced, there are essays that are required. There may be an interview, real-time or asynchronous. There may be recommendation letters that are considered. But ultimately, holistic admissions requires universities and admission committees to use the entire context to answer 3 basic questions. This is what I would boil it down to. Can they do the work? Will they do the work? And what will they add otherwise? And it has to be in the context of the programmatic, faculty level, and institutional, mission and resources. But generally speaking, it is a broad, view of an applicant to give them benefit of all the things that they may have had to overcome to achieve the things that they did. So you're finding students and making sure that you're not using a bit of exceptionalism bias in evaluating your students, which leads us to perpetual student underrepresentation.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Kiyomi, this is back to you. Can you share any student outreach and engagement practices at UTSC that you've seen to be effective or responsive to the needs of the prospective student population in your region?
Sure. So I'll use the two examples of the transitional year program at UTSC and then the C U of T Scarborough program. With the TYP program, we're really thinking about the intersectionality of identity, the various lived experiences of students. So one of the things that we did is on the application form, there's a written part that students, will write their experiences, why they want to be considered for TYP, why they think they would be a good student for that program, et cetera. But we also made that part of the application an online submission where it could be a verbal recording or a video recording, because we know not everyone may feel comfortable writing this information out. They may have neurodiversity or just other forms of communication that are more suitable to them. So students could record themselves answering that question either just with audio or with video. And as we go through the application process, sure enough, we have some students that will take us up on and use that option. Specifically with the C U of T Scarborough program, again, going back to my earlier point, we want to try and create programming that really fits with the multiple interests of the students. But I think one of the things that really comes forward with this program and speaks to the success of it is the amount of personal involvement that it takes from our staff at the Scarborough campus. We have staff members that are spending hours speaking and meeting with just one student throughout the whole process. This might be, helping them to get acclimatized to UTSC and learning just to be part of the environment, to then later on, if they're thinking of applying to university, having those multiple conversations with them about what that would mean. And a lot of these conversations aren't even procedural in nature, talking about here's the requirements, here's how you apply. A lot of it is quite personal, like telling the student, you could do this, boosting their confidence, talking to them about how they could leverage their own experiences to support them in their future steps. So it does mean that for folks, that you have to care when you do this work. And it comes across in your interactions, and students are very astute. They know who is the caring person because they will go out and seek those conversations with those individuals. So that's the one thing I think with a lot of our access and outreach programming is you have to find the right people. You have to have people trained and able to appropriately support your audiences, and then you have to create an environment in which they feel that they can do the work that they need to do. It's also important to acknowledge that we are not the experts. So even as we continue to do this work, there's lots of stuff we don't know. We're making mistakes. We're, going back to the drawing board, and we're asking for help. And again, going back to TYP, this is one of the examples. After 2 years of the program, we were realizing, wait a second. We've got some significant challenges here because students that are being admitted into the program require a whole lot of support that we were not able to appropriately give them at Scarborough campus. And we were just feeling like this was not true to our values. This was not true to the goals of how we started the program. So it was paused this year for us to reassess what it is we really need to do and how can we actually do the work that we say we're going to be doing. And sometimes that's a tough decision you have to make in access and outreach. You really have to check yourself and reflect. Are you doing the things you say you were going to be doing? And if not, what do you need to do to get you back on track?
Thank you so much. And thank you, Kyomi, for naming the caring person that students are looking for. And I just want to acknowledge that I truly believe that folks, educators, administrators in access work are the most compassionate that there are in education. So give yourselves a round of applause, because there's a compassion tax to this work as well. I know how much work it actually is to deal with students who, have wraparound needs, housing, mental health, financial aid, etc. So thank you for that. Just want to acknowledge that tax that everyone is paying. So last couple of words, any final thoughts before we open the floor for questions from the audience? June, any thoughts or anything you want to leave with the audience today?
my final sorry. A lot of my final thoughts, my colleagues up here already outlined everything in terms of access points and all the barriers. I just invite everybody in this room, if you want to come visit, if you want to spend some time with us and get to know our students and our programming. And yeah, like there's already really great partnerships that we have already with access programs, academic bridging, TYP, and then just finding where, I guess, where the gaps for us, where we're not reaching, especially at Scarborough students. We have a population of students at Scarborough, but because of geography and transportation, they don't really get to us all the time. But yeah, that's my favorite thing to do, is to host people and visit, and then we can sit down and really talk about how we can all work as a team and not just be almost like silos like in the university, because everybody's, like you said, is already doing really great work. We just need to work together. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure everyone's worried about overwhelming you after this. So if you have any notes about capacity or how much you can.
We have a really good team too at First Nations House,
Okay.
so we can always bring other people in as well.
Thank you, June. Appreciate that. Ryan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I have 8 things I'm going to say, or I was going to say, but I'm going to limit it to 2. And so the first one is connected to June's point. And so how many of you heard of this concept, cultural taxation? Okay. This is, I think, critically important. So there was a scholar back in the mid-90s, and I'm reflecting on, I actually started my work in November 1999, so I've been doing this for 2 centuries now. So there's a scholar named Padilla who basically concepted this idea that people who are underrepresented, right, as staff members, as faculty members, you know, at places where there is underrepresentation, are often taxed with responsibility beyond the bounds of what should be expected based on their job description, right? So it's like, hey, I've got 10 Indigenous students coming tomorrow, June, do you mind? Right? And that's the 5th request she's got this week. And meanwhile, she's still got to answer the emails and take the calls and do all the other things that come along with the work. I think the larger point that is connected to that, the second point is, it takes a commitment from the entire ecosystem to make this all work. You know, we can go out and we can provide a wonderful, you know, tour experience. We can go to all of the schools and we can, you know, provide all the support. But all of those points that Helen mentioned around housing, and I think the Office of the Vice Provost Students does a wonderful job, but these students have experiences in their academic programs, and ultimately it is incumbent upon, you know, all of us, not just those of us who look like the folks we're trying to reach, not those of us who have these roles in our title, but I think it's incumbent upon us to empower our colleagues where appropriate to help us in this work, so that, you know, burnout is real. Burnout is very real, and I've seen it happen over and over, and, you know, to be quite honest, like sometimes I feel it myself. But the thing is, I think it is incumbent upon us all to be in community, you know, in this work to support each other. So it's not specific to student recruitment, but really about self-care and community care for those of us who are doing this work.
Thank you, Ryan. Kiyomi, last word.
I don't know. I think June and Ryan really summed it up. That piece of the personal toll, the mental, physical, emotional, that is absolutely real. I'll never forget the day we were launching CU of T Scarborough. I was crying in my car driving into work because of how overwhelming it was to put it together, like literally put that program together in 2 months, because that's how things work at U of T, right? Like it takes years and years of planning, and then all of us are like, okay, you got to do it, and like, okay, in 2 months, and you pull it off, you make it work. But I think why we do it is because we see those students, right? We see them. We see them when they're coming in, and then we see them after they've left. And we know the impact that we have in their lives, but not just their lives, in their circle of support, in their communities. And that's the driving force that pushes us to, you know, keep going. But, you know, it is important for us to to balance and to know when to rest. And then the other piece, it's important for us to advocate. How can we, use our roles, our positions, our connections, our network to hold the institution accountable? Because you say you are an inclusive and equitable place. Now here's, what we need. Here are the supports, here are the resources, here are the challenges that we are facing. And I think that's also something that's important. So for us, working together and being collaborative helps us to have a stronger presence so that we can continue to hold our organizations accountable to this work.
Wow. Round of applause for our amazing panel. Thank you so very much. I just want to note that, they all said yes right away. And despite Kiyomi and Ryan, I know you just came back from some international travel on university business. It was like a yes, and I think you were like in the airport or something. So thank you so very much for making time to be on this panel. It means so much to us. So it's your turn to ask the questions. Who's going to go first? Are we going to give it to Dr. McCready first? I'm playing up like you always. Yeah, we're actually waiting for a volunteer too.
But my other general question related to that is just, what are you thinking, or how do you think AI might be bringing new context to sort of holistic admissions. I'll phrase it like that. I'm not trying to talk about just, fraud or plagiarism or anything like that. Let's just talk about
who are leading these processes have to really, shape how the process works and try to the extent possible to exclude, bias from the process, though it is impossible. The piece around AI, so that's something that, we're working on. So Sandy and Bob Ghazale, who's in economics, are co-chairing a AI task force for people who are in student service functions. And so one of those places or one of those functions is admissions. So I have the pleasure to sit on this committee and to be able to think about, how students use or potentially will use AI as part of the process. I do think that there's lots of variance in what people think about whether or not AI should be used by students or prospective students or whether it should not be used. I do think that the revolution is here, and we as an institution have to embrace the reality that students are using it. But also, too, I think it's incumbent upon us to give them some guidelines on how to use it responsibly, how to use it appropriately, and how to avoid some of the pitfalls that come along with the use of AI. So for example, how many of you heard of AI hallucination? Okay, a few of you have. So it's this concept that, so students engineer a prompt and say, tell me about the top, scholarship published by Professor Lance McCready. And it's like, on Access in the 2000s, the benefits of being an Aussie professor, 2002, right? Like, and so on and so forth. And so the student gets up and says, I want to introduce you to Professor Lance McCready. And they haven't realized that AI has hallucinated and actually made up the sources, right? And so a lot of students will write things and produce things that are not based on reality, not based on truth. So the truth is, short of, someone plagiarizing an essay creating an essay using artificial intelligence, I think it's incumbent upon us as an institution to think about how to support students and prospective students in their use, because they're already using it, and a lot of school districts have gone to helping students use AI as a tool in their learning. I don't know if others have thoughts.
A quick word to respond to this so we can give other folks some. Kiyomi, do you have
Sure.
something?
I guess the one that we have thought about that, Lance, thinking about interviews, especially if we get an application where there's a lot of gaps and we want to learn more about the student. And I think we haven't gone that route because particularly with our TYP audience, they often have lots of interruptions with their educational journey, and the educational experience has not been a positive experience. So do I want to bring students into an environment now which could be quite stressful for them to now use that as part of the admissions process for this program? And so the struggle is this doing more harm for this student, having them go through this interview for me to learn more about them and to determine if they meet the admission requirements? Is there other criteria that we could look at? So we have lots of conversations on our panel about what are the other pieces we could review to determine admissibility for the student. I do think there is a place for an interview because, again, it's creating that human connection. I just don't know if it's part of the admissions process. Maybe it's, you know, in a bit of a layered approach. So after you've admitted to the student, then you have that interview to get to know them, outline the expectations, but even to learn from them, what are they hoping to expect from the program? I think in those conversations, you can come up with a plan, especially if there are identified gaps that you might have seen on that application. And you know, okay, they could be struggling with, you know, XYZ in that follow-up meeting. That's where you can highlight to them, hey, you know, when we were reviewing your file, we saw that they could potentially be some challenges in these areas. How can we work together to help you to overcome some of those difficulties that you might have?
Thank you very much. I'm just going to do a quick check with Anda to see if there's anyone online who has a question. Yes? Okay, I think we're going to go online, go back and forth. So maybe if you could pass the mic to Anda, or Anda, if you can talk loud. Yeah, yeah, and the mic, okay.
Thank you. We have a question from Akua Joseph for Kiyomi. You spoke about programming that really speaks to the audience. What kind of programming did you find to be the most popular with this student group?
Yeah, so I've got my colleague Andrew at the back there. Andrew is now our lead for CU of T Scarborough, and him and my colleague Denise and Thevia and lots of folks in our community partnerships and engagement office, they're taking the lead on that. But we've done drumming workshops, we've done paint events, we've done sessions where folks from our marketing and communications office will come in and talk about, you know, sort of content marketing. We've had professors come in and do ukulele workshops and musicality, as well as, you know, sort of the library coming in and doing the, you know, the workshops on research and academic integrity and those kinds of things. So I think you need to have a mix of the academic pieces, because you do want students to develop their skills and their competencies. The hope is after this access program, they will go on to post-secondary studies. It might be at Scarborough, but we're fine if they go to another university. I mean, this is the whole point of the program. So you want to develop their academic competencies, but then you also want to keep them engaged in the program and let them know that university is not just about going to school and studying, right? We know our most successful students here at U of T are the ones that are engaged in extracurriculars, that are involved on campus. So we try to bring some of those pieces into the program. And then the other piece, I think, which is really helpful for us too with CU of T, is creating spaces for the students to just talk and to connect, because this is going to be a transformational 2 years for them to be going through this program. And they just might need a space to reflect, to talk to their fellow classmates who are going through the program, or to talk with our own staff that are helping them, and just ask those questions that they might encounter as they go through the journey, and creating those moments where we just have that casual conversation time.
Thanks, Kiyomi. We've got a question at the back and then right in the middle. So we'll go to the back first. Just in the spirit, just say your name and your division or area. Oh, you're not waiting to ask a question?
Volunteer.
Oh, you're volunteer. Sorry, I didn't meet you. I'm sorry about that. Okay, sorry. Question right here.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ellen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the recruiters of the Faculty of Arts and Science. The question that I had was kind of based on what Kiyomi had mentioned about deficit thinking. I think that's an excellent theory to work from and to kind of understand more or less and go through. But in that way of thinking about deficit thinking, a lot of the folks that we're hiring in these EDI spaces, in this professional quote unquote space, right, are from these communities that we can recognize that we do have a deficit bias, whether it's structurally or whether it's personal and that sort of thing. So I guess my question is, how is senior leadership and the OVPS office, supporting frontline staff, EDI staff, with more or less seeking out their experiences in the role and adapting policies, budget, or programs to reflect the feedback that they're receiving from EDI frontline recruiters. As someone that works in this space, I do think that there is a huge disparity in the spaces between what I'm seeing as a frontline worker and what I'm seeing in policy. I recognize there's a time difference that happens in between and that it may take some time to actually make that match. But in the interim, what is senior leadership doing to support EDI staff, especially those that they're, again, we're actively seeking folks and, you know, the competition saying folks from this specific community are more likely to apply or encouraged to apply. So how are we, or how are you all rather, as senior leadership, supporting these staff in their EDI frontline roles with the emotional labor, with the professional labor? Again, I use that word professional with quotes because I think it's a very nuanced word. But yeah, we're using that lens of deficit thinking. How are we applying this to the frontline workers that are working currently in these spaces, trying to advocate for these students? But again, maybe we're being perceived with a deficit lens and not being taken seriously.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ellen. It's definitely something that I think about. And 2 weeks ago, we had our admissions retreat. And one of the things I talked about was just the importance of ensuring that everybody in our departments and on our teams are appropriately trained. And I think training on equity, diversity, and inclusion should be mandatory. Mandatory training, doesn't matter what role you're in, what position, what pay band level, whether you're a PM or USW, mandatory training. Because this is how we're interacting with one another. It's not just in access and outreach that you will talk about equity. No, equity is part of our lived experience. So that's one thing in terms of I see, you know, how we can have some change and have it be systemic changes that let's now start to ensure that we're all educated on the concepts and the policies and the values, et cetera, that are important to our work. And then from that foundation, then we can start to build from there. For me personally, I think it also has to do with a little bit of risk taking. So I'm lucky that in my role as a director, I have power and I can use that. So this past spring, I was finally able to connect with our equity, diversity and outreach office. I said, hey, you know what? We haven't had a chance to do some team building things. I really wanted to be some workshops on EDI. It's been a while since we had something in person. And so we brainstormed a couple of topics that we would talk about. And one of them was cultural humility and just looking at this from an Indigenous perspective of really, again, approaching our interactions, approaching our work from a perspective of being humble, of learning, of being open, of not being, you know, sort of looking at yourself as an expert. And I think a lot in our career, in our professional world, we do wear those hats as experts, right? I'm the expert in admissions and recruitment. I'm the expert in engineering, in kinesiology, et cetera. And so this idea of cultural humility is really sort of trying to take that hat off and open yourself to that opportunity of not knowing and realizing that the person that you're engaging with could know more about you, and that's a good thing, and that's how you create the connection. The other thing we talked about, and we ended up doing this workshop, so we focused on cultural humility, and the other piece was harm-induced microaggressions. Now, I've done microaggression training many times, but harm-induced microaggression just was a light bulb moment for me and for many on my team, because it was the reality that, hey, no matter what your intention is, what you did, what you said was harmful to the other person. And I think just by shifting your focus to that, it creates a different way in terms of how you would talk to your colleagues and how you would work with them. The third piece, and again, this is where the risk came in, is they said, Kiyomi, you know, we're playing around with this idea, and we could also do a workshop on whiteness and white supremacy. I thought, ooh, I've never seen that before at U of T. That's interesting. And, you know, we kind of talked about it. And initially I was a bit cautious because I was like, oh, I don't know if that will make my team feel comfortable. But then I said, I'm the only Black director in admissions and student recruitment at UTSC. If I don't do this, who else will? And that's, again, the personal responsibility that I take in my role, that this is something that is important to us. So it does mean that those of us that are in positions of, you know, sort of professional capacity where you have that ability to make those decisions, you have to take the risk and make those decisions to ensure that we are creating the equitable, inclusive spaces that we want.
Yeah, and I'll just, everything you said, Kiyomi, resounds with me. I think it's really difficult, and I found that, you know, particularly at a very large decentralized university, to legislate or create a policy that's going to be uniformly applied. You know, so there's this concept, street level bureaucracy, whereby people, you know, they say, okay, here's the rule, and then this is my interpretation of it. And then you've got 700 different interpretations of it. Going to what Kiyomi said and connecting that to the cultural taxation piece, as one who has an identity, as one who is doing this work, I think it's incumbent upon me, in particular with the folks who I work with who are doing this work, who have it not only in their title, but are doing it as a function of their passion for advocacy, to use a people-centric, empathetic approach to management. And that, so for me, that is, I use, it's called My Bad. MYBADD. My best advice, dig deeper. So people will come to you with a smile. How you doing, Kiyomi? How are you doing really? And I'm starting to dig, and once I start to dig a little bit, okay, now I feel like Kiyomi's doing a great job, but she's overwhelmed. Hey, I'm going to intervene. You're not asking me for help on this project. I'm gonna get you some help on this project. Hey, you need to take some time off. You don't get a choice in the matter. Take some time off. Because again, it goes back to that self-care piece. You know, obviously you don't work at the very highest levels of university leadership. And I think that, you know, we have made some progress, but we have a ways to go to ensure that the people have the resources that they need to do the work and have the supportive community. So when they encounter the challenges that will inevitably occur with respect to this type of work, that they do feel supported. Second piece, really quickly, I think there is a professional development angle that I always use. And so for people who are in roles, again, for people on my team, I can't speak for the university more broadly, I want to make sure that just because they're doing work that is EDIA, right, that they're not pigeonholed into a place where that's all they're deemed to be able to do. So it's incumbent upon me to say, okay, this is your role. However, let's let you learn a little bit more about international recruitment and admissions. Hey, why don't you come to this communications meeting with me? And so I think, you know, the grassroots approach to it is probably going to be more effective than overarching policy, because again, at a large decentralized university, there is, you know, street level bureaucracy in place. And then that sort of lends itself to the disproportionate or erratic, you know, interpretation of said policies, even if they are well intended.
Thank you so much. So if you, please raise your hands high so I can see them if you have another question. Okay, say Andrew first, and then my colleague here from Victoria College.
Hi, Andrew from UTSC in the Dean's office. This comes from Kiyomi's point, but then hopefully also building on Ellen's question as well. I was thinking a bit about the tension with the institutional structures and what we want or need for access programs to flourish. I don't think they're in necessarily conflict with one another. I think a bit about, you know, Pac-Man as a game where you can move up, right, left, down, and really figure out where you want to go, but there's also barriers about how far you can go. This question is to anyone on the panel, but how has the process been with reimagining or beginning to push the boundaries or the structures or the barriers that are in place at the institution.
Okay, let me see if I can get the other question as well, and we can double up. So anything online? Nope. So maybe.
Hello, everyone. I'm Imani King. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Academic Advisor, Equity and Outreach at Victoria College. So I do half academic advising and half recruitment for our Black, Indigenous, and racialized students into the Faculty of Arts and Science. I've gotten the chance to meet all these lovely folks on the panel, as well as work closely with June. And my question is for June. I think for many of us, we do get the chance to cross with our lovely Indigenous students who self-identify to us. But how do we help with the U of T bounce when we're like, oh my gosh, you need to go to First Nations House, but we don't go with them? How can we help support that transition over? Because I think even at the St. George campus, it's even hard to convince them to cross campus. And I think that's something that I'm coming up against in my role as well. So I was wondering if you had any tips and support on helping that warm handoff that you mentioned earlier during the panel.
Oh my. So I do remember thinking about this last night because I was thinking about if I was a student, how would I make it to all these amazing places? We've had a lot of success with being present at orientation events, um, anything to do with access days, and even just like some of my colleagues were saying, like making program that already exists, but sponsoring a lunch, like design something that we can work together, even just like having us come to your space and spending time as well. Because I recognize, for example, students who are in TYP program, they stay for the first, like for those years, a lot of them will stay at TYP because they have their own space, they have their own services, they have their own community. So even just having us like spend more time in your space and like having us there, like present. And it really just is all about outreach and promotion. But like, I think it's been pretty successful because, I mean, yesterday I had 3 TYP grads come see me yesterday. So they are accessing our programs and they are accessing our services. But I had an idea that we could do a programming for the upcoming cohort of the Volt program as an example. It's just like reaching out and seeing what kind of programming you can create together and then using all the resources. And then just making sure that they're aware of all of our services. But it is also important for students to know, especially if they're Indigenous, that it doesn't matter in terms of their identity, like how they identify, that they are welcome in the space as well. Because I find that that can be like a barrier to some of the students where they don't feel comfortable accessing. So it's just trying to find those ways to make those warm referrals. But I know it's very labor intensive, but that's why we do a lot of outreach with programming and then we go directly to people's spaces. Yeah.
Andrew, back to Andrew's question, Ryan and Kyomi. So any trade secrets on how you make the systemic change happen? Am I summarizing that correctly, Andrew? Yeah, okay.
I think Andrew knows the answer to this already. Yeah, it is definitely a challenge working within the structure of U of T. Just something as simple as getting our C students Wi-Fi access ended up being a thing because they just need a whole bunch of other credentials that you don't anticipate you would need with something as simple as that. But I think part of the opportunity here is, again, leveraging relationships with colleagues across the campus. A lot of our access programming, sometimes it could be new things that we want to create, and we might need, support from other folks on campus. So use this as an opportunity to reach out to your colleagues in IITS or in, the co-op office or whatever, and let them know, hey, this is a project we're working on. Here's how I could use support. Do you have any ideas, any tips and pointers? So it becomes an opportunity for you to learn from one another rather than just trying to get something done. So for us at UTSC, whether it's trying to figure out the best way to get students Wi-Fi access or figuring out what type of transcript they're going to receive after they complete the CU of T program. We're really trying to reach out to the individuals within our campus who are the experts, share our information about what we're hoping to achieve from the program, but also gaining insight and feedback from them. I don't think you can solve a lot of these structural changes on your own, just within your own sort of department or core group. You really will have to reach out to the other departments and colleagues and learn from them.
I agree with what Kiyomi said, and I think that, regardless of what role that we have at this university, we're all in the relationship business. And ultimately, the question regarding some of the systemic barriers require us, I believe, to be systems thinkers and do system level inventories. And, I'm gonna kind of, I'm gonna contradict what I said earlier regarding the cultural taxation piece. I think it is incumbent upon us to make ourselves known, not only in our roles, but also in our desire for advocacy for students. I can't tell you how many times I walk across campus and I meet someone and they say, oh, I didn't even know you were here. Right? It's a very large place. But to Kiyomi's point, I think making connections and, how many access programs do we have now? 100? 135. Who can name all of them? Okay, yeah. Okay. I know you can. That doesn't, Nancy. That doesn't count. That doesn't count. Anybody but Nancy. No. So the idea is there are lots of people doing things here, and I think it just is about relationship building and building interconnectivity. Because sometimes there are systemic barriers that exist, and the people who are in leadership aren't aware of them. So just really having a conversation about who you are, what you do, and what you're trying to achieve, and being collaborative. It's not going to solve all of the problems, to be clear, but I think it gets us in a direction where we can solve the decentralized tri-campus 100,000 student university problem that is sort of endemic throughout our culture here.
Thank you. Any other questions? We've got about 10 minutes. Just one second. Anyone online? Okay. Did you have a follow-up question? Go ahead. Is it Ellen, or I have two people here? Okay, go ahead. Ellen, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My follow-up question was, again, we've heard it throughout the panel's discussion, which was great, about leveraging your conversations with your colleagues and whatnot. Now, going back to the question that I believe your name is Andrew and myself had asked about, the tension and mitigating that disparity between senior leadership and frontline staff that are doing EDI work. How would you recommend then, because I know there's a chain of command that needs to be addressed, it needs to be followed. And again, when it comes to those type of things and authority pieces, it may be difficult to kind of break out of that to speak to somebody that may have more knowledge about a certain topic that you want to discuss. So what would your advice be to frontline staff workers that do want to learn more, or maybe like Ryan just mentioned, talk to senior leadership about what's going on that they may not know about? How do we then address that? Because there is that chain of command, there is that hierarchy that must be followed. And again, we all want to keep our jobs for the most part, so yeah.
Yeah, that is a complex question, but I think that it's one of these things here where, and I think that I know Helen is a big advocate for ensuring that people, to the extent possible, have platforms to talk about what it is that they do. I also think that let's just be honest. Sometimes we're at a university where we have students and faculty members and staff from almost 200 markets, and they speak probably just as many languages, right? Like they speak Spanish and they speak German and they speak Arabic, but they also speak quant and qual and mixed methods. And sometimes the people who are in leadership, who are faculty members, don't want to hear what you have to say unless you show them some numbers. I mean, it just is what it is. Or sometimes people don't want to hear what you have to say unless you have some data to support what it is that you are trying to, the point that you're trying to get across. I do think that all of us, and I use the same approach. When I have an issue that I want to sort of move up the chain, so to speak, I simply will ask my supervisor or manager for advocacy. right? I think we all need, find people who are going to be champions. And sometimes it's just as simple as, Kiyomi's my manager. Hey, Kiyomi, I have an issue with X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about that. How can we push this issue forward to resolution? It's not an easy issue to solve because, again, it's a large place, and, there are meetings that I have a colleague who is, a similar level. They have access to this meeting. I don't, right? I have access to this meeting and they don't. And that sort of, I think, underscores the complexity. But ultimately, I think it's up to all of us to talk to whoever is on our team, who is in management of our team, to say, hey, this is my issue, and I would really like your help in pushing this cause forward. I don't know if you had something to add to that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And just from my experience, sometimes that's the route that you take and you kind of get nowhere. And you're like, okay, well, that doesn't. So sometimes what I've done is I've just, again, leverage those relationships of other individuals that I know that are doing similar work. And I will go and have those, coffee chats, meetings with them, and just say, "Hey, I just want to bounce an idea off of you. Here's the challenge. Here's what I'm struggling with. Can you give me any ideas or recommendations?" And those have often been really great for me because then that individual can share with me another person that I can go to, or a different way to position my request or the project it is I'm working on. Maybe I was lacking data and they can help me leverage some of those data pieces that I wasn't thinking through all the way. So yes, follow, the parameters that you have within your team, within your departments. But if you feel like you're coming up against, some blockages, don't be afraid to reach out to the other individuals across the institution and your other colleagues and see if there's any ideas that you can generate. Our HR folks and ODLC folks, we always talk about mentoring, and there's mentoring programs, and some are formal and some are informal. So I look at these kinds of outreach that you do with your colleagues in a way as, okay, here's another opportunity for me to gain some insight in a relationship with this individual.
Yep. Dr. ABC, and we have one online. So right after Dr. ABC, we're going to go do the online.
Thank you so much. Fabulous. It's really good stuff. I know that, but 2 minutes, so I'm going to take 1 minute. I think I just want to add, it's not a question, but I'm not on the panel either, right? But it's something, I keep hearing the question, Andrew, you're my namesake. Andrew, I'm Andrew, nice to meet you. And I hear you, Ellen. And I think it's when we get into these kind of conversation about access, I think it's important for us to kind of really be honest about the kind of who are the players in the room. And the players in the room, like I hear you, Ellen, twice you say the same thing, is about your level and how you're trying to work within an institution. And I think sometimes what I experience as well as a part of the Access for Black students is sometimes the frustration comes from, not sometimes, the frustration always comes from the idea that you're in institutions with, and I use the word perimeter. And how do you work in the perimeter? And I think something we need to be honest about when we're having this conversation is that if you are trying to create access for the underserved, it's gonna have to be, it can't be within that perimeter. This idea, and we have to be brave enough to speak to leadership. Well, I've done it. I know it's consequential. That's the next thing, that people in this room who is doing certain kind of access work have to be honest that your work is consequential. I know when I go to certain meetings and I say certain things, I am not the most popular person, but I'm not here to be popular. I'm here to do access work. Because I can do popular work, but this was access work. So I think we have to be a little bit more honest about the ways in which we have to not work within the perimeter, and how we're going to scale the perimeter wall. See what I just did? Scale the perimeter. We say back home, jump the fence. How are we going to jump the fence? Come on, Jamaican dialect, right? How are we going to jump the fence to do this kind of work? And I say that in a very honest way because I've been a part of the Black Future Education's Pathways program. And sometimes I sit in the thing in the energy in the room, and I said, am I fighting against the same people in the room that are trying to do the access work? And so that's what I feel. That's what I feel. And so I think we need to really have another fireside chat another time, because not today's 2 minutes, I see your paper, right? To say, how are we empowering the people in the room to kind of scale the fence? without losing your job. Now, we don't want you to lose your job now, Helen, right? But scale the fence without losing your job. And I think there are tools. I heard you said a lot of that, friend. There are some tools. You said you had 8, you only gave us 2. So I know you have more tools. Give us, we need to talk about the tools the next time in how we have these honest, genuine equity conversation about who is being left out and how we are how we work with the underrepresented in a pace that is this fabulous, right? To get there. So yeah, I just want to say that in my 2 minutes.
Preach. Thank you, Dr. BC. You got it done. Yeah. Hey, Ryan.
I want to respond to that. That was so spot on. And one of the things that I want to say is, and this is my own cognitive dissonance, right? Is thinking like, oh, I might be the first person in Canada with this job, and if I mess it up, and I am so conscious of the fact that we are all, some of us are firsts, and when you're a first, when you're a trailblazer, right? And, I operate as, I know I'm an outsider. I'm not a Canadian. I'm not a, right? And I use that lens to think about sort of one, to recognize the fact that this work, you are a disruptor, right? That's number one. Number two, the song and dance that we often have to play, and sometimes we have to work, right? And so some of the things that, we don't talk about, because we know there's opposition to that. I've faced that in some of the, just thinking about working with boards, like, well, why would you want to focus on Black or Indigenous students? Don't other students have, right? And so it's that type of thing that I think those of us who are in these roles have to be mindful of while we're policy agents, while we're people agents. Unfortunately, we have to play the political game. And that's the thing. And I'm looking forward to staying connected with you, just as a function of, just the spirit of community. So thank you so much.
And we're so happy to have faculty in the room, because there's also certain things some faculty can say that we in administration can't say. So thank you.
Tenure.
Yes. Any other, and I think there was one online, yes.
So there's a question from Denise Lopez. Access is taxing work, but we love it. How do we incorporate more reciprocity into our work? We often have to ask favors of other departments and faculty to support our access programs. Any suggestions on giving back to our partners?
Was that Denise Lopez, you said? Okay, yeah. So Kiyomi. That's
Yeah, Denise and I have had many conversations around this piece. It is taxing. Often the work is not appropriately funded, and we care about the people that we serve. So we want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can do. And that means that we're trying to find money from all the places and knocking all the doors and say, hey, can you pay for a lunch? Can you get some swag, etc. I think this, again, goes back to that relationship building piece, why that's so critical, because the connections and those relationships that you have, that's what helps to support you during those phases where you do need to ask someone for a favor or knock on a door. But it's not ideal, because ideally we should have a sustainable structure for all of our access programs. So you never feel like, uh-oh, we're going to run out of money and we don't have food for students, or there's no transportation or busing costs. Like, these should always be part of the development and the ongoing production of our access programs. And sometimes that doesn't always happen, because we often need to get things up and running really fast, and it means that you've got a little budget to start off with, and it gets you through that first year, but then you don't know how you're going to carry it through to the second year. So kind of goes back to Ryan's piece of how we can show the impact of the work. Sometimes the impact is going to be by numbers, whether it's application numbers, number of folks engaging in your programming. A lot of it is qualitative, because we're talking to students and we need to record the impact that this type of programming has had in their lives, and sharing those stories with those individuals that have access to funding and that control our budgets, I think, is really important. so they see that the value of this work is instrumental in changing somebody's perspective towards the university.
Two quick things to add. One, I think we need a precise protocol for partnership recognition. So how do we recognize our partners? Does it happen enough? Does it happen regularly? Is it specific enough? So I know one of the things that we do, with the Enrichment Academy and with our community advisory partners is, regular, recognition programming, dinners, that sort of thing. But I think the second part is creating economies of scale, right? The type of event that you can have for, say, I'm coming up with a hypothetical number, $1,000, right, may not be as grandiose as the event where 5 partners contributing $1,000 to come up with a $5,000 program, right? And that's often what happens. We work in silos and in vacuums, and that's what I'm going back to my point about making ourselves known, connecting with others who are doing this work as a function of economies of scale and support.
Thank you so much. And we know that there's an invisible cost to collaboration as well. Like that does take resources. We think it's a cost saver, but it does take some energy, it takes time away from other work. And we want to try to think about that to do that better. And hopefully we can help as part of ASPO. So that's it for our panel. Thank you so very much. Please give them another round of applause. So a couple of housekeeping notes before lunch. I noticed that you're all sitting at the tables with your colleagues, people you know either from your campus. When the loud clap from FAS, I think most people are at the same table. So what I'm going to ask is that after you get your lunch, which is just in the other room, please try to find another table. Let's mix it up a bit because we are going to have some conversations. And we're hoping that you're having those conversations with new people. All right? Sound good? Chanel, is there anything else I need to say?
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to make note that the roast beef and chicken, they're all dairy-free. Only the salmon has dairy, which is cream cheese. The chicken wrap has bacon in it. And also, for those who noted dietary restrictions, they're off to the side where the roasted vegetable sandwiches are. And we will resume at 12:20. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. All right. And if Rihanna is still here, if she can come up to the front. Uri.
There's so many conversations that I'm not privy to because I'm not in the director level thing. I'm literally working with students like every day. Yeah, like I'm like individual. Okay. Really, the only way for them to know about it is that if we're informed.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. All right. All right. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch. I know there are some fruitful discussions happening at your tables, some folks who are catching up with others. But don't worry, there will be more time for you to have those conversations during the conversation circles that we have planned right after or updates. So at this time, I would like to invite my colleague, Anda, who is our Programs and Pathways Officer, to deliver some of our ASPO updates, and then I will share some shortly after as well. Come on up.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Hope you enjoyed the lunch. Don't fall asleep on us. I know it's warm and cozy. So we'll be sharing a few updates. I will start and then I'll hand it over to Chanel. So I will share some updates on our work as it relates to our first strategic priority, which is around understanding structural barriers. And then I will share some updates that relate to our survey findings, which coincide with our second strategic priority. And then I will be happy to share some upcoming resources we're working on that will hopefully speak to both of those. So as we talked about earlier, the first strategic priority at ASPO is around working with our internal and external partners to identify structural barriers. And as Helen noted at our Access Connections Day in 2023, this was prioritized amongst the Access community to be our first priority. And so to give you a bit of a sense of the timeline, after this was prioritized, ASPO decided to gain some more insight into structural barriers. And we did that primarily by engaging with the Access Programs University Fund. And specifically, we added questions related to structural barriers in both the application for this funding, as well as in the final reports of those who did receive the funding. And so today, I will share some findings around the themes that emerged that related to structural barriers through the application and final reports of the fund. So I'll start with the insight that we gleaned from applications for funding. And largely these were related to structural barriers specifically to access to post-secondary education. And so folks who were applying for funding to run access programs were proposing programs to us. And we asked them to identify structural barriers that impede educational access. And through those 10 applications, we had 27 different barriers emerging. And what I will share now is some of the key themes that emerged in analyzing those barriers. And I will note too that those barriers were identified by cited research, but also the applicant's own professional experience. So the top 3 themes that emerged in analyzing those barriers to post-secondary, the first one was lack of representation, both in specific fields and professions, but also in the post-secondary context. So I should note it came through specifically and quite heightened in the context of lack of representation amongst mentors and role models in certain fields. But again, lack of representation among staff, faculty, and students in post-secondary education. And this was related to other themes related to lack of exposure to certain fields as a result of this lack of representation. The second theme that emerged was colonization and systemic racism, and we saw this surface in the context of more individual levels, such as deficit thinking amongst school teachers and guidance counselors who may be underestimated and under-recognized skills of students, but also in more academic and systemic practices like academic streaming. So these were some of what emerged in folks' feedback. And finally, we saw socioeconomic status emerge, both at individual and family level, but also in the context of school level and community level, all of which impacts access to opportunities that impact preparedness for and interest and ability to pursue post-secondary education. So other themes emerged as well, but we wanted to highlight these top 3 that came through in reading feedback from folks as they were identifying barriers in the context of applying for funding for access programs. So next, I'm going to share some findings that came through in the final reports. So these are final reports of access programs that were funded by APUF and where we asked folks to tell us about any structural barriers they encountered throughout their access programs. And so what you'll notice here is that these tend to be a little bit more programmatic. These are about the access programs that were being run. And here we identified 13 barriers that emerged from feedback from the APUF recipients. And I should say too that in some cases, folks also identified promising practices that help them to address some of these barriers. So I'll go through these ones as well. So the first one was challenges with participant outreach and engagement. And this came through specifically also for Indigenous students and underrepresented students. And this is something that we also hear anecdotally from our partners in Access. The next was external partner engagement, both at individual level, but also institutionally. And we heard this especially strongly when it came to TDSB engagement. We wanted to actually share a quote from one of the final reports. They noted that planning substantial engagement with schools is challenging due to potential for teachers' assignments to change abruptly, even up to the beginning of the semester. There were instances where workshops and field trips we planned had to be canceled because the involved teacher was reassigned or the class was discontinued. And they noted that this contributed to teachers' reluctance to engage in partnership around access programs. An additional barrier that was identified was internal funding issues, such as delays with processing funds, but also administrative hurdles. I think we've heard about that earlier today, right? So workload issues as well. So all of these internal issues that may impact access programs for us. And finally, we heard about inadequate space, whether that is meeting space to run programs on campus, but also inaccessibility, for example, how commuting might impact students' ability to participate and continue on in programs. So again, these were barriers that came through at a programmatic level when it comes to access programs and that were identified in those final reports. So we wanted to share this back with you to highlight some of the ways in which we've explored structural barriers, but we want to hear from you. So when we do the conversation circles later, if you are at the table that is discussing this, we really invite you to give us feedback. So were the barriers that you encounter and that you are familiar with, did we reflect those? Was something missing that is top of mind for you but that we didn't talk about? So please give us your feedback and feel free to explore outside of the question and around it as well. So next, I will speak on some updates related to our second strategic priority, which was largely for us explored through the survey. So for context, this priority relates to how we support the capacity of our internal access community to support students, current and future and prospective. And so we envision this as being done through opportunities to connect together as a community and to learn with and from each other. So the survey that we distributed back in September, October to our access community really aimed to understand what's important to the community, what is top of mind, and also how you work with your partners, all of which is to inform this opportunity to strengthen capacity. And so I will share the findings from the survey, but first I'll just give you some context about who responded. We had 80 respondents broken down by campus, as you see on the slide there. Something that was interesting was that only 17% said that access was the sole or primary focus of their role. Interesting, not surprising. We know that folks are sometimes doing this on the side of their desk, so it's good to have a sense of where they sit as far as other portfolios that they're working on. We also asked to better understand the types of access programs that folks are supporting, and we used these three broad categories of outreach, access and transition, and retention. And this doesn't mean that one program focuses on just one of those areas, so it could be multiples. That's why those percentages are not based on number of participants. We were also curious to see specifically what activities folks work on in their access-related work. And so we identified about 7 or 8 activities, and we asked folks to tell us the extent to which they engage with these in their roles. And over half of the respondents basically engage in all of these activities in their roles. So you're busy. And we did also get some additional tasks, but they fell within the same sort of general themes. So it helps us to know that we have a good understanding of what folks are working on, and also that, again, you're busy and roles are multifaceted. So next, we asked a little bit more specifically about what folks want to learn about, how they want to learn it, who they want to connect with, and what that really looks like ideally for them. So I'll go through these one by one. What we learned is that folks are really interested in connecting with access programs who support programs similar to theirs. So this emerged as the top interest around who they wanted to connect with. But there was also, of course, significant interest in just connecting with folks across the tri-campus and also with folks on their own campus. We wanted to know what shape this connection would take. And what we learned is that there was a preference for small group connections around shared interests, but also special events like this one and ad hoc learning and professional development opportunities. So other things are of interest too. We're just highlighting the top ones here. We learned that folks are quite interested in connecting virtually, but don't worry, there was interest for in person as well. It wasn't a vast difference between those preferences. And of course, interest in connecting in their own campus. All of this makes sense, right, in the context of who they want to connect with. The big why was, why do you want to be part of an access community? What would make this community valuable for you? What are your desired outcomes for belonging to this loose and diverse community? And what we heard is that there's a desire for collaboration and innovation, as well as the development of shared practices and learning and knowledge exchange. So these emerged as the top desired outcomes for belonging to an access community. We finally wanted to dig a little bit deeper. So when it comes to collaboration, innovation, or learning, or shared practices, what specific topics are top of mind for the community? And so we identified some that we were familiar with, and we asked folks to tell us whether they were interested in them. So these were all the topics, and most folks were very interested in them. It was a Likert scale, so very interested. And the top 3 highlighted there are the ones that emerged as being of highest interest. So documenting and data collection, partnership considerations and agreements, and also program evaluation. But I have to stress, again, all of the areas were of quite strong interest to folks. So we hope that this will give you a glimpse into the community's interest. Mind you, of course, it's a huge community, and we had 80 respondents, so we understand that not everyone will have been represented. And again, we will ask for your feedback on this, but this will help to inform our own opportunities and our own work as we move forward. So I wanted to first share some of the upcoming resources that we are working on and that will be coming to you very soon that address some of these areas. So Helen alluded to this earlier. We will very, very soon have a tri-campus access programs database. I joked earlier that Nancy is the current database, and we're just going to scan her head. So this will be a searchable database of all the access programs across the tri-campus. We know that this was of interest to folks. Obviously, folks want to identify programs that are like theirs. And so this will be helpful for that, but we will definitely really need your help to make sure that we reflect all the access programs and that we reflect them accurately and as you would like to see them presented, right? So very soon you will get an ask to review and update your access program information. So please, please, please do that, because that's what will allow this database to be helpful. We hope that this will be available in the new year. Another resource we're working on is an access resources repository. So this will be a repository of reports, publications, manuals, toolkits relevant to access programs. We foresee this being something that we continue to work on and continue to update. This first iteration, which we hope will come by the end of this calendar year, will focus primarily within a Canadian context, but again, we hope to expand and diversify their resources, but just something to get us going and provide some resources to the community. And finally, we will have more connection and learning opportunities like this one, so we hope to, again, have those ready for you in the new year as we go. This is what we're working on right now, and as you can see, it will be ready quite soon. But again, we want your feedback. So if in the conversation circles you happen to be in the tables focusing on learning and connection, give us feedback. Did we catch the topics that are top of mind for you? Did we miss something? Is there anything else we should keep in mind as we develop these resources and opportunities? And of course, now that we know that collaboration and innovation is of interest to folks, not that we couldn't have guessed that, but it's good to have it confirmed. What do you want to see that look like, and what topics do you want to get started with right away. So again, discuss the question and around the question, and we really look forward to your feedback. So now I'll hand it over to Chanel to talk about partnerships.
So partnerships is another area that we are interested in learning more about from the Access community as it relates to current mechanisms or the lack thereof that are in place when thinking about how we build and maintain sustainable partnerships. And as such, a part of the same survey that Anda referred to earlier, we asked a question around first, what types of partnerships are in place, and also the types of partnership agreements attached to those. So as you can see, we have a pie chart here with some illustration of the results. So as you can see, almost close to half of folks are working with both internal and external partners. And within that subgroup, they have indicated that they work with a variety of, or they have a variety of partnership agreements in place, ranging from formal to informal and then quasi-formal in between. We also noticed that for respondents who indicated that they only work with external partners, they were more likely to have formal partnerships agreements in place, which was reassuring to see. And then on the flip side, for folks who only work with internal partners, they were likely to have more informal and quasi-formal partnerships agreements in place, which wasn't a surprise to us. As you can imagine, we're working in the same institution, so the perception of risks might be lower, and through those informal relationships is how we collaborate and share the work that we do. And then there was a small percentage, about 13%, thereabout, relatively speaking, who noted not applicable. And we presume those folks are more so those that work in more administrative roles that are not front-facing. And they are also the folks who indicated on the survey that access is a small or good portion of their role. So that was sort of a scale that we provided, and they sort of listed or selected those on the lower end of the scale. So as you go into your conversation circles, some questions that we want you to think about. Which challenges, if any, have you encountered in building new or maintaining existing community partnerships? And by community partnerships, we are referring to external partnerships to the institution. The next question here, what are some of the practices that have been helpful for your programs in maintaining those partnerships? As we'd like to glean more information about wise practices that may help some of the other programs that are struggling in this area. And what would you say are key considerations for Access programs as they build and maintain sustainable partnerships? And a question that we wanted to leave with you, would a partnership roadmap or toolkit be helpful for you in your work? Are there any resources we should consider including that you think would be helpful in your work as well? So that leads us into our conversation circle. So you'll notice in the middle of the table, there's a stack of sheets. On top, you will find the instructions, and basically for the next 40 minutes, you will have 40 minutes allotted to facilitate a roundtable discussion on themes provided. Please assign a scribe to capture highlights from your discussions using one of the following methods. So you can do it manual, so using the sheets provided on the table, there's some blank paper at the back. Or you can do it digital if you prefer to make some notes on your device, computer, phone, and then you can send it to the Access email, which is provided as well. And that is pretty much it. I know Helen had made a note that she would like folks to move around. As we know, folks might be sitting with, individuals that they're familiar with, and we want you to mix and mingle and to learn about the work that other folks are doing. So feel free to, stand up at this time, relocate to a different table, and jump right into the conversations. Thank you.
doing structural barriers to post-secondary education. So there were three: lack of representation, colonization, systemic racism, and then the socioeconomic status. We agreed across the board. We have representatives from the Faculty of Music, Dala Lana, FAS, and TYP. So oh yeah, and then we have Ryan sitting with us too. Yeah. Something we've kind of danced around today, but we'll make that blanket statement, is the elite identity at U of T being in and of itself a structural barrier, where we invest more in the reputation of U of T rather than the access. And then it's kind of, first let's talk about how great U of T is, and then, oh, well, this is how you could get in. But just looking at how these notions, and we're talking about how students can share on Reddit, and then family members of U of T was so difficult, or you're going to experience this, this, and that. So those persuasive notions of what it is to be a U of T-er could prevent students from even seeing themselves, in addition to the lack of representation, colonization, and the socioeconomic barriers that they'll be experiencing. And to lean on that other point is the belief of support. So when we have access programs, having certain supports, or when we're going into recruitment spaces, talking about all the offerings, the continuum of that support. So if they have that experience, can that be translated in other spaces? And those bottlenecks and red tape and bureaucracy, or being redirected to certain offices. So it's them seeing that it's disconnected, and they have this idea of what support is, and they can or cannot access it. So it's how can we be consistent and continue to make sure that they have everything in place that they were already having in place from their onset of starting post-secondary. And then the other last point was a psychological barrier that we also, student psychological barriers of them not admitting their struggles, the difficulties of expressing help. How will they be seen if they, back to the deficit thinking from the colonization and systematic racism barrier that they've identified at ASPO. Just them being able to put forth their narratives, and think, is that going to be respected? Am I going to be perceived as someone in this bucket of need when we say this is resources and the right for students to be able to utilize? But it comes with that whole psychological, all those factors and those barriers that they create in the process, and that we perpetuate in our roles potentially, and in these institutional offices that we have at U of T. So that's another barrier that we identified as a group too. Yeah. I did. It's right here.
Thank you. Round of applause for them. Great feedback. Is that you? Okay. All right. So just your name. Yes. And who's at the table? Yeah. And what the question was. Sure.
Hi everybody, I'm Imani. We basically had UTM's over there, so we know UTM wasn't here. But we basically had the rest of the university at our table. We had Scarborough, Arts and Science, TYP at St. George, Medicine, Engineering, OISE, and Kinesiology at our table, so it was very, very fun. We were talking... But we were also talking about structural barriers, and I think one of the biggest pieces that came up at our table, and my groupmates can let me know if there's anything that I'm missing, but one of the biggest things we hinged upon was the intentionality between our outreach versus access programs, and understanding the main difference between that. So the difference in intentionality between outreach and access programs, because our access programs are typically when the students are already here with us, and they need to be sustainable, aka we need them to still be here, graduate from U of T. But our outreach can look really different, where we talk to students who don't even touch U of T, but that's still something that we know the work is important to do, and talk about the pathways to university, but also producing clarity around our outreach and access programs about what students should be expected to want, or other criteria involved. So we were talking about, our folks at KPE were talking about learn to play, so like learn to play with sports, but same thing for their program, where anyone who's just interested in going to university can come, versus Cassandra's programs at engineering is like, we need them to be a prospective engineering student. We want them to thrive and be a U of T engineering student at the end of the day. day. So really understanding that clarity portion, not only for ourselves as we do the work, but also as we tell the students that when we put that on our websites online, so we don't have the parents who are really good parents that are like, my child is Black, this is a Black program, they're going to it. Like, we want them to understand why their student should be going and where their child should be going, but also increasing the access to understanding of what the university experience and transition actually will be like, but doing our best with our local communities as well, like arts and science is working on, and also looking into parts that are not represented in the U of T space. So that's some of the bigger takeaways, but if anyone else has anything to add? No? Okay, cool.
Thank you so much. Wow. Such rich discussions. All right, who is it you, Andrew? Okay.
Andrew, our group talked about learning and connection. I think one of the first topics that we went over was being unsure of who does what, especially if it's not reflected in our titles. And so we're excited for the database, but also thinking a bit about how do we share our work or our portfolio items. So that if I had a question or if I wanted to collaborate, I know who to reach out to. We were also thinking a bit about the value or the impact of asking or over asking different campus partners. So we have a lot of different access initiatives, equally important, but there's only so much capacity that a partner may have. And so how do we consolidate the initiatives or the work that we're doing so that maybe we can group things together so that it's not a huge burden or a time sink for our partners as a whole. We were also thinking a bit about pipelines or pathways to success. And so we have a fair number of initiatives at this table. And we were thinking about how do we pair or complement our different initiatives where maybe they start off with us in their grade 11 or grade 12 year, and then there's a summer initiative that they can go to downtown. Think about how do we create these additional touch points where you're building on the skills and gaining self-efficacy, but you're also gaining, ideally, affinity with the university, but really knowing where you want to go afterwards, whether it's university or college at large. I think that is the main points. Okay, great job, team.
All right, I just want to take a moment to say thank you all for being here, for coming from UTM, from UTSC, from the east, the west, north. This is really a meaningful event for us because we're going to take and consolidate everything you've said, and it really will inform the work going forward. It will inform how we propose our new priorities for next year and beyond. And I have a couple people I need to thank. So before it was 2019 to 2022, it was Nancy. So let me just like give a little round of applause to Nancy. So APOOF, Access Connection Day, and then 2022, I joined, and then it was us for a couple years, and now we can actually make all of this happen. Thank you so much. And Chanel, I thank you especially. Chanel has really taken the lead on today's event. Thank you so much, Chanel, for today. I also want to thank Rihanna, who's our photographer, and Stephanie and Kenneth, who are our volunteers. If you guys can stand up, let them say hi. So thank you so very much. Teamwork makes the dream work. I promise not to be corny. I've also promised to chill out. I'm saying it in front of everyone. I'm gonna chill after today. So thank you so much. Safe travels home. And we will be sharing this feedback with you. We're gonna summarize it and share it within the next couple of weeks. Okay? Thank you for being here. Yay, we're done. Congrats, guys. Yay, great job. Great job. Great job.
The thank you bags
Yes.
are still at the
Oh, I forgot about those.